Most champions, when they retire, they build a wall around the truth. They talk about the wins. They protect the myth. Lennox Lewis did that too, for a long time. But at 60 years old, with nothing left to sell and nothing left to prove, the full picture of what it actually cost him to be the best heavyweight of his generation has started to come into focus. These are the 5 men who tested Lennox Lewis more than anyone else he ever faced. Before we get to the list, you need to understand something about Lennox Lewis that most people never did. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a chess player who happened to be 6'5" and 250 pounds of controlled destruction. He thought about boxing the way generals think about war: terrain, timing, consequence. He won the heavyweight championship of the world 3 times. He knocked out Mike Tyson. He knocked out Evander Holyfield. The man finished his career with a record that put him in the conversation with Ali, with Frazier, with Louis. And for decades, he let the record speak for itself. But records don't tell you what happened in the dark corners of a fight. They don't tell you about the moments nobody claps for, the moments inside a man's chest when doubt floods in like cold water. Those moments live in the fights themselves, if you know where to look. Before the names, let's be clear about what hardest actually means in this context. It doesn't mean the fighter who landed the most punches. It doesn't mean the biggest name on the marquee. Hard means something specific here. It means the fighter who reached inside the machinery of who Lennox Lewis was and found a loose bolt. 5 men did that. 5 men, across a career that spanned 15 years at the highest level of sport, made Lennox Lewis uncomfortable in a way the record alone doesn't fully explain. We start with number 5, May 6, 1995. Madison Square Garden. Lennox Lewis is the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. He has beaten Frank Bruno. He has beaten Tommy Morrison. He is, by most accounts, the best heavyweight on the planet. And then Ray Mercer hits him, not once, twice. Ray Mercer was a 1988 Olympic gold medalist, a former WBO heavyweight champion, a man built like a short wall, with hands that didn't ask permission. But what made Mercer truly dangerous wasn't just the power, it was the belief. The man genuinely believed he could hurt anyone alive. And on that night in Madison Square Garden, he proved it. Lewis survived. He got up. He used that chess player's mind to navigate the rest of the fight, boxing, moving, refusing to give Mercer another clean look. And he won by majority decision. But this was new territory. Lewis had never been put on the canvas in his professional career before that night. He had never had to recalibrate in real time under those circumstances, in that building, with that crowd noise telling him everything had just changed. He got off the floor and won. That part of the story is clean. What's less clean is the question the knockdowns raised, not just for the watching world, but for Lewis himself. Because a man who has never been dropped doesn't fully know what dropping feels like until it happens. Now he knew. The men higher on this list gave him knowledge that was harder to live with than that. Before Mike Tyson became the name everyone whispered in the dark, there was another name that heavyweight fighters said, quietly, carefully, the way you talk about a bad neighborhood after midnight. Donovan Ruddock. By the time Lennox Lewis fought Ruddock in October of 1992, Razor had already knocked down Mike Tyson. Not the faded version, not the post-prison version. 1991 Tyson, at his most feared. And Ruddock put him on the canvas. Tyson won that fight, barely. And the judges made a decision that people in boxing still argue about to this day. The point is this. Ruddock was legitimately terrifying. Lewis won by second-round TKO, looked dominant on the surface, and technically it was. But what the scorecards don't capture is the particular psychological weight of fighting a man like Donovan Ruddock. The taxation of standing across the ring from someone whose entire message, every time he breathes, every time he moves forward, is, "I will not stop. You will have to end me to beat me." Lewis landed clean shots on Ruddock. Hard shots. The kind that change the math of a fight when they land on most men. Ruddock absorbed them and kept coming. Kept pressing. Kept making the space smaller. That's a different kind of opponent. Not dangerous primarily because he can hurt you. Dangerous because he makes you reconsider whether you can hurt him. And for a fighter who relies on the authority of his power as a controlling force, that reconsideration costs something. 4 down, 3 to go. And here's where it starts to get genuinely uncomfortable. There are nights in a champion's career that don't fade. They don't soften with time. They sit in the chest like a stone, permanent, heavy, real. For Lennox Lewis, that night was September 24th, 1994, Wembley Arena, London. Oliver McCall was not supposed to win that fight. Nobody thought Oliver McCall was supposed to win that fight. But in boxing, supposed to is a fairy tale you tell yourself in the gym. The ring doesn't care about supposed to. What made McCall dangerous wasn't just the right hand that ended the night. It was the unpredictability, the angles, the way he crowded the space that larger fighters believed they owned. Lewis's jab, that long, authoritative, almost contemptuous jab, needed room to breathe, room to control the distance. McCall refused to give him that room and worked the inside in a way that neutralized the things Lewis did best. And then he took the title. Lewis got the rematch, February 7th, 1997. He stopped McCall in 5 rounds and won the belt back. So why does McCall sit at number 3 on this list, above fighters Lewis never actually lost to? Because McCall didn't just beat him. He cracked something open that couldn't be fully sealed again. He proved to Lewis, and to the entire sport, that the machine had a flaw. That the unbeaten heavyweight champion of the world could be beaten, could be stopped, could be standing in an empty arena on the wrong side of history. That awareness, the permanent, lived knowledge that it was possible, is something Lewis carried into every single fight that followed. He never walked into a bout again with the unconscious certainty of a man who has never lost. McCall removed that. You don't get it back. If you want to understand why Evander Holyfield sits at number 2 on this list, you first need to understand what Evander Holyfield actually was. Not what the record says, not what the highlights show. What he actually was, standing across from you in a heavyweight arena at the end of the 20th century. Holyfield was a cruiserweight who decided that the rules of physics didn't fully apply to him. He moved up, got bigger, got stronger, without losing the hand speed, the timing, or the ring intelligence that made him exceptional at the lower weight. By the time he fought Lennox Lewis, he had already beaten Buster Douglas, beaten Riddick Bowe twice, beaten a prime Mike Tyson twice, and survived events that should, by reasonable expectation, have ended his career on multiple occasions. This was not a normal man. Their first fight, Madison Square Garden, March 1999, ended in a draw. A deeply controversial draw. Ringside observers, punch statistics, and the majority of boxing analysts scored it for Lewis. The judges saw it differently, and the sport's reaction was a fury that hasn't fully dissipated to this day. Lewis won the rematch by unanimous decision, more clearly this time. But winning against Evander Holyfield was always a relative concept. You could beat him on the scorecards and still walk away feeling like you'd been in a war you barely survived. Because Holyfield brought something that power couldn't neutralize and technique couldn't fully contain. An absolute, structural refusal to be discouraged. Lewis would land clean, the kind of shot that alters a fight when it connects with most men, and Holyfield would absorb it and come forward. Not flinch, not reconsider. Come forward. Those two fights, 24 rounds of some of the most demanding heavyweight boxing in the modern era, represent the longest sustained test of Lennox Lewis's career. Not the most dramatic single moment, the longest sustained examination of everything he had. Holyfield never gave him a round of ease, not 1 minute, not one exchange where Lewis could feel like the situation was fully in hand. That kind of opponent doesn't just test your body or your technique. He tests your belief in your own ability to impose your will on the fight. And for a man who built an entire career on the certainty that his skill and his intelligence and his size, combined, made him ultimately unmanageable, that was the most corrosive challenge Holyfield could present. But it wasn't the most damaging thing anyone ever did to him. Before we get to number 1, sit with this for a moment. Ray Mercer put Lennox Lewis on the canvas for the first time as a professional. Razor Ruddock made him question whether his power could actually control a fight. Oliver McCall broke the seal on his invincibility. Evander Holyfield pushed him harder, for longer, than anyone else in his career. Each of those men left a mark that the subsequent wins didn't fully erase. The man at number 1 did something that sits in a different category entirely. Something no rematch result, no title defense, no championship celebration could completely address. He removed Lennox Lewis's certainty that his size, his skill, his power, and his preparation, all of it operating together, would always be sufficient. And the name is not the one most people would predict. Brakpan, South Africa, April 22nd, 2001. Hasim Rahman. Say that name to a casual boxing fan, and they'll nod vaguely if they remember it at all. Hasim Rahman never built the career that his single best night suggested he was capable of. His story in boxing is largely defined by one afternoon and what it meant for someone else. But say that name to anyone who studies heavyweight boxing seriously, and they'll pause. Because what happened in Brakpan that April remains one of the most genuinely shocking results in the history of the heavyweight division. By 2001, Lennox Lewis was at the absolute summit. He had beaten Holyfield twice. He held the lineal heavyweight championship. He was, by virtually every informed measurement, the best heavyweight on the planet. Hasim Rahman was the mandatory challenger, a legitimately dangerous puncher, capable on his best night of hurting anyone. But the expectation, the near-universal expectation across the sport, was that Lewis would manage this cleanly and move on to bigger things. And then round 5 arrived. A right hand from Rahman. Lennox Lewis, face down on the canvas. The referee counting. Lewis not moving. Not knocked down. Knocked out. Unconscious. The heavyweight champion of the world removed from the fight in a single second, by a man most of the sport had already dismissed. The story behind that punch is complicated, and it matters. Lewis traveled to South Africa underprepared. He spent time on a film set during the training camp. The altitude in Brakpan, nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, wasn't properly addressed in his preparation. His conditioning coming into the fight was not at the standard his team had built their careers around. That is documented, acknowledged by people within the camp itself, so the question the sport has debated for more than 2 decades is a legitimate one. Was it the altitude? The preparation? The overconfidence that accumulates at the very top of a sport when you've been there long enough? Or was Hasim Rahman, on that specific afternoon, in that specific location, simply capable of defeating Lennox Lewis? The honest answer, and this is what makes it number 1, is that no clean answer exists. The factors were real, the conditions were compromised, but the punch still landed. Lewis still went down and didn't get up, and a man who built his entire identity on superior preparation and execution was left without a clean explanation for the worst moment of his career. He got the rematch. November 2001, Las Vegas. A fully prepared, visibly motivated Lennox Lewis stopped Rahman in 4 rounds with clinical authority. It was not a close fight, but the rematch didn't resolve the question. It gave him somewhere to place it, a result to point to. That is not the same thing as an answer, because the version of Hasim Rahman, who appeared on April 22nd, 2001, at altitude, with nothing to lose, in front of a crowd that believed in Lewis and not him, that version knocked out the greatest heavyweight of his era. No subsequent result changes what that was. It only changes what came after. There's a version of this story that becomes a lesson about preparation, about the cost of complacency, about what happens when a champion lets his standards slip even slightly. Those lessons are present. They're real. But that framing is too small for what the full list actually represents. When you place all 5 men together, Mercer, Ruddock, McCall, Holyfield, Rahman, what you're looking at is a complete inventory of every form of doubt that can exist inside a great fighter. Mercer showed him what it felt like to fall. Ruddock showed him what it felt like to land your best punch on someone and watch them decide it didn't count. McCall showed him that losing was not hypothetical. It was available. It was something that could happen to him specifically, in a real arena, in front of the world. And once you know that, you carry it. Holyfield showed him that even 24 rounds of his best work might not be enough to make an opponent stop. And Rahman showed him that every variable he controlled, the preparation, the size, the experience, the intelligence, the accumulated certainty of a 15-year career, could be taken away in 1 second by a man the world had already counted out. That is not a boxing lesson. That is something that applies well outside the ring, and Lennox Lewis knows it. At 60 years old, Lennox Lewis has the record, the belts, the legacy, and the institutional respect of a sport that doesn't give those things easily. He's been placed in halls of fame. He's been called the best heavyweight of his generation by people who have spent their professional lives making exactly that kind of evaluation. None of that changed because of the 5 fights on this list. But the 5 fights on this list tell you something about him that the titles don't. He wasn't the heavyweight champion who couldn't be hurt. He was the heavyweight champion who could be hurt, knocked down, knocked out, pushed to the outer edge of his ability for 24 rounds, and who came back. Every time. With preparation, with patience, with the cold and focused work of a man who understood exactly what it would take. That is not the myth of a champion. Myths don't get knocked out cold in South Africa. That is the actual thing. The real record underneath the record. And there is one more fighter, a name that belongs not in the list of men Lewis faced, but in the separate and more complicated category of men he never got to. A fight the sport wanted, that circumstances prevented, that Lewis himself has addressed in the years since his retirement. That conversation is its own story, and it is worth telling properly.